She returned his engagement ring publicly, slid it across a white linen tablecloth in front of 200 people, and told the whole room she was finally choosing herself. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 72 hours before she performed that humiliation in front of Atlanta's finest, the quiet man sitting across that table had signed his name to a $40 trillion energy deal that was already holding her family's entire world together without a single one of them ever suspecting it. She thought she was leaving a man beneath her. She was leaving the foundation beneath all of them. And when the truth finally surfaced, not through an argument, not through a confession, but through a front-page headline hitting 300 inboxes before sunrise, every door her family had spent decades building their status behind was going to come off its hinges, one by one, in exactly the order they deserved. The question is, how does a man stay silent that long, sitting at a table where he is dismissed, condescended to, and publicly humiliated, when he is holding that kind of power in his briefcase? If you already know this man deserved better, hit that like button right now. And if you are new here, subscribe, because we tell these stories every single week, and you do not want to miss what is coming. Drop your city in the comments. Let us know where in the world you are watching from today. Now let me take you back to where this all started, to a retirement party in Buckhead, Atlanta, on a Saturday evening where a woman stood up in a room full of witnesses and made the most expensive mistake of her life without spending a single dollar. She returned his engagement ring publicly, slid it across a white linen tablecloth in front of 200 people, and told the whole room she was finally choosing herself. Now let me take you back to where this all started. To a retirement party in Buckhead, Atlanta, on a Saturday evening, where a woman stood up in a room full of witnesses and made the most expensive mistake of her life without spending a single dollar. The Buckhead Country Club knew how to dress a room. Whoever Gloria Drummond had hired to arrange the flowers had done God's own work. White hydrangeas and ivory roses ran the length of every table, and the chandeliers threw gold light across 200 faces that had been carefully selected to witness this moment. This was not a retirement party. It was a coronation. And Gloria Drummond, seated at the center of the head table in a champagne-colored gown, intended to be crowned. Raymond Ose had driven 40 minutes from Decatur in a suit he had pressed himself that morning. Not because he could not afford to have it done, because his mother had taught him that a man who could not care for his own things had no business caring for anyone else's. He straightened his tie in the rearview mirror, checked it once, and walked inside. He was early. He was always early. The cocktail hour was already moving by the time he found the reception area, and the room had that particular energy that comes when Black Atlanta dresses up. Laughter that fills space, perfume that announces arrival, the low percussion of heels on marble. Raymond moved through it quietly, nodding at faces he half recognized, accepting a glass of water from a passing tray. It was near the east window that he saw her. She was older, perhaps 65, draped in an Ankara print wrap of deep orange and green that had no business being as elegant as it was. She was speaking to no one when she spotted Raymond, and something shifted in her face, not recognition exactly, but something closer to reverence. She crossed the room toward him with a deliberateness that parted the crowd without effort. She took his hand in both of hers. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but every word landed clean. "My son is on the consortium's legal team," she told him. "He asked me to find you tonight. He told me to tell you congratulations." She paused, and her eyes held something he could not quite name. "You have no idea what you just did for us." Raymond thanked her warmly. He meant it. Across the room, Kezia watched the exchange from beside her brother Wendell. She leaned toward him without turning her head. "See what I mean?" she murmured, "always with the random people." Wendell made a sound that was half laugh, half agreement, and took a sip of his bourbon. The woman in the Ankara wrap watched Kezia walk away. Her expression carried something close to pity. Raymond found his seat. The tables had been arranged in a horseshoe around a small raised platform, and the name cards placed Raymond at the far end of the family table, near enough to be present, far enough to be symbolic. Wendell was introduced to the room by the evening's host as a prominent Atlanta real estate developer, and the applause was generous. When Raymond was introduced as Kezia's fiancé, Wendell leaned into the microphone and added, "He does something with rocks," which pulled laughter from the room like a hook pulling a fish from still water. Raymond smiled. He always smiled. The dinner moved through its courses with the unhurried confidence of an expensive evening. The salmon was perfect. The string quartet in the corner played something Raymond's mother would have called Sunday music. Gloria held court at the center table, touching shoulders, receiving toasts, performing the gratitude of a woman who had always known she deserved exactly this. Then came the tribute segment. The host returned to the platform and invited family members to share words honoring Gloria's legacy. Her sorority sisters went first, then a colleague from the district office, then a woman from the Links chapter who spoke for 4 minutes about Gloria's service to the community. The applause after each speaker grew, and Gloria's posture grew with it. Then Kezia stood up. Raymond noticed immediately that she had notes. Not a phone. Actual folded paper, which she smoothed with her palm before she began speaking. That was the first signal. The second was that she did not look at him when she rose. She spoke about her mother first. She spoke about sacrifice and legacy, and what it meant to watch a woman build something from nothing. The room was attentive. Gloria dabbed her eyes, and then Kezia's voice shifted just slightly, just enough, and she said that honoring her mother tonight also meant honoring herself, that the greatest gift she could give Gloria was the truth, that she had spent too long choosing comfort over clarity. She removed the ring. She held it for a moment, and Raymond watched her hand, and he understood that this had been rehearsed, the way she held it, the pause before she set it down, the deliberate, unhurried slide of it across the white linen toward him, like a chess piece being surrendered across a board. She told the room she was no longer settling. The applause from Gloria's table was immediate. A few others joined from instinct, the way people clap when they sense the room expects it. The rest of the 200 guests went very still. Raymond looked at the ring on the tablecloth in front of him. He picked it up. He placed it in his breast pocket. He did not stand. He did not speak. He did not change his expression. He set down his water glass. He folded his napkin along its original crease. He pushed his chair back quietly, nodded once to no one in particular, and excused himself from the table. He had signed a $40 trillion deal 72 hours ago. She had no idea. And the story of how those two facts came to exist in the same room on the same evening, that is the story worth telling. To understand what happened that Saturday night in Buckhead, you have to go back 3 years. You have to go back to the beginning and watch it happen slowly, the way damage always does. Not all at once, but in increments so small that a patient man could almost convince himself it wasn't happening at all. Raymond met Kezia Drummond at a Morehouse alumni mixer on a Friday evening in October, in a rented event space in Old Fourth Ward, where the music was just loud enough and the lighting was just flattering enough that everyone looked like the best version of themselves. He was standing near the window with a glass of sparkling water when she walked over and told him directly that she had been watching him not talk to people for 20 minutes and wanted to know why. He told her he was listening. She laughed. It was a real laugh, not a performance, and it caught him off guard in a way that mattered. They dated for a year before she introduced him to her family. He noticed the delay but did not remark on it. The first dinner at the Drummond House in Cascade Heights was a Sunday in November. Gloria had cooked a full spread, pot roast, candied yams, green beans with smoked turkey, and the table was set like company was expected, which Raymond understood meant he was being evaluated rather than welcomed. He brought wine. He arrived on time. He complimented the food genuinely because it deserved it, and Gloria looked at him across the table with an expression that was perfectly warm and completely closed, like a door painted to look like a window. When Kezia mentioned that Raymond was a mineral rights consultant, Gloria nodded slowly and said, "That sounds like interesting work," in the tone of someone describing a child's drawing hung on the refrigerator. Wendell did not bother with indirection. He was already at the table when Raymond arrived, already 2 bourbons in, already comfortable in the authority that came from being the only man in the room who owned buildings. When Raymond's profession came up, Wendell leaned back in his chair and smiled the smile of a man who had nothing to prove because he had already proved it to himself. "Dirt money," he said, not unkindly, which was somehow worse. "You're out there surveying land that might be worth something someday." He gestured at the room around them, meaning the house, the neighborhood, the portfolio that paid for all of it. "This is worth something right now," Raymond said. "You'd be surprised what's underground," and left it at that. He always left it at that. That was the pattern, established at the first dinner and never broken. Wendell ranked himself. Gloria implied. Kezia, in those early months, would sometimes catch Raymond's eye across the table with a look that said she knew, that she saw it, that she was embarrassed by it. That look was what kept Raymond at the table. That look was what he came back for. But looks change, people change, or maybe they don't change so much as they stop hiding what was always there. By the second year, Kezia had stopped catching his eye. By the third year, she had started finishing Wendell's sentences, not openly, not cruelly. She was too careful for cruelty, but in the way she would laugh a half-second too quickly at Wendell's remarks about Raymond's work, or ask Raymond at family dinners what exactly he did again, as if she had forgotten, as if it wasn't worth remembering. The question always landed in front of an audience. It always had an audience. Raymond answered the same way every time, patient, clear, without defensiveness. Preston Avery appeared in their lives on a Thursday evening at a Links chapter fundraiser that Kezia had brought Raymond to because it was important to Gloria and therefore important to her. Preston was tall, easy in a room, the kind of man who held his glass at the perfect angle and knew everyone's name. He was introduced as a financial advisor, which he was, technically, and he shook Raymond's hand with the particular firmness of a man who is assessing you while appearing to greet you. Raymond felt the assessment. He recognized it the way one professional recognizes another operating in their element. Preston paid Kezia the kind of attention that had a frequency to it. Not romantic, not obviously, just slightly too available, slightly too attuned, always finding her in a room, always the first to refill her glass. At a second event 6 weeks later, Raymond watched Preston place his hand briefly on the small of Kezia's back while steering her toward a conversation, and the touch lasted 1 second longer than courtesy required. Raymond said nothing. He was a man who chose his moments. He had learned that from his father, who drove a bus for 30 years without ever once complaining about the route. It was a Tuesday evening in late spring, over dinner in the apartment they shared, that Kezia set down her fork with the careful placement of someone who had rehearsed the gesture and told Raymond that her mother thought they should revisit the timeline on the wedding. That maybe 4 months wasn't enough time to plan something worth doing right. That there was no rush, was there, given everything? Raymond looked at her for a moment. He said, "Whatever you think is best," and picked up his fork. What Kezia did not know, what none of them had ever thought to ask about because none of them had ever thought Raymond worth asking, was that in a downtown Atlanta office building, in the files of a company registered in Delaware, and in the soil of 3 West African nations, Raymond Osei had been building something that made Wendell's portfolio look like a parking lot. And he had been building it alone, in silence, for 4 years. What Kezia told Raymond at that dinner table was that her mother thought they should revisit the timeline. What she did not tell him, what she could not have told him because she did not know, was that while the Drummond family had been busy measuring Raymond by every standard that suited them, Raymond had been building something that would make every one of those standards irrelevant. This part of the story begins 4 years before the retirement party. It begins in a small office on Auburn Avenue in Atlanta, where Raymond kept a desk, 2 filing cabinets, a geological survey printer the size of a small refrigerator, and nothing else he did not need. Raymond had understood the earth the way other people understood language. He had known it since his first geology course at Morehouse, when a professor put a cross-section of sedimentary rock on the projector, and something in Raymond's mind had clicked into alignment like a key entering a lock. He went on to Georgia Tech for his doctorate, focused on subsurface formation mapping, and spent his early career doing contract work for multinationals who needed to know what was underneath land they were considering. He was precise. He was rarely wrong. And he had a particular talent that the larger firms had noticed but never fully rewarded. He could look at data that everyone else had already reviewed and find the thing they had all missed. That talent was what his uncle Kofi had always called the gift of deep looking. Kofi Osei died in the spring of a year when the dogwoods were particularly brilliant along the streets of Decatur, and Raymond flew to Accra for the burial and came back carrying a grief that settled into him quietly, the way grief does in men who do not perform it. What he also came back with was an envelope his uncle's attorney had pressed into his hands at the estate reading. A plain manila envelope containing 2 things, a cashier's check for $340,000 and a rolled set of land survey documents, yellowed at the edges, dated 1994, covering 3 specific zones of coastal and interior geography across Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal. Raymond set the check on his desk. He unrolled the documents and weighted the corners with his stapler and his coffee mug. He looked at them for a long time. What his uncle had acquired in 1994 were survey rights to parcels that the major energy companies of that era had briefly investigated and then abandoned when oil prices dropped and the economics no longer justified the overhead. The documents were not deeds, they were not leases. They were a specific class of geological survey licensing rights that had been grandfathered under treaty provisions none of the current consortium players had thought to review. In the wrong hands, they were old paper. In the hands of someone who understood what the data underneath that paper actually said, they were something else entirely. Raymond spent 18 months cross-referencing his uncle's 1994 surveys against 3 decades of subsequent seismic data he pulled from academic repositories, government geological services, and 2 research institutions in Lagos and Accra with whom he had professional relationships. He was methodical, he was quiet. He told no one what he was looking at. What he found, mapped across the intersection of those surveys and the modern data, was a continuous subsurface corridor stretching 460 kilometers, a formation of extraordinary projected yield that had been overlooked because no single company had ever held the rights to see the full picture at once. Each had only their piece. Raymond was the only person in the world who had assembled the whole. He called David Mensa on a Tuesday morning and asked him to form a Delaware limited liability company. He told Mensa to name it Kofi Holdings. Mensa asked no questions. He had been Raymond's attorney for 11 years and had learned that when Raymond was quiet about something, it was worth waiting for. Over the next 4 years, Kofi Holdings LLC, through Mensa's firm, through local counsel in 3 countries, through filings that moved slowly and deliberately through the correct governmental channels, assembled the complete mineral rights licensing structure for the corridor, local partnership agreements in each nation, survey rights consolidations, government licensing approvals obtained through the proper processes, paid for with the inheritance money and the fees Raymond earned from his regular consulting work. Every acquisition documented, every filing clean. Raymond did not mention any of it to Kezia, not because he was hiding it from her specifically, but because it was not yet something that needed to be mentioned. It was work. It was his work conducted in his office, the way his mother had done hair in the back of the house without explaining each client to anyone. The consortium approached Kofi Holdings through Mensa's office in the 2nd year of the acquisition process. 5 firms, Meridian Global, Vantage Continental Partners, and 3 others, had independently reached the same conclusion that Raymond had reached alone. The corridor was real, it was massive, and whoever held the rights gateway controlled the entire project. They needed Raymond. They had no other path. It was during that same period that Vantage Continental Partners was looking for a U.S. operations base in Atlanta. Mensa's office facilitated the real estate introduction as part of the broader relationship building between Kofi Holdings and the consortium members. The building that Vantage selected, a Peachtree Street property in Midtown with good bones and a reasonable lease rate, happened to belong to a man named Wendell Drummond. Wendell signed the lease and called it a good quarter. He had no idea who had helped put his anchor tenant in that building. He had no reason to ask. The man who did it drove a decade-old car and surveyed dirt for a living. 6 days before Gloria's retirement party, Raymond sat across a mahogany table from David Mensa and 2 consortium attorneys in a conference room on the 31st floor of a building in downtown Atlanta. The agreement was 412 pages. Raymond read every one of them. He signed where indicated. He thanked everyone in the room. He drove himself home, heated up leftover jollof rice, and went to bed before 10. Mensa began calling the next morning. Raymond let it go to voicemail. It was Gloria's night, and whatever needed to be decided could wait until Monday. He had no idea that Kezia had already decided something too. Mensa had called 11 times between Saturday night and Sunday morning. Raymond had listened to none of the voicemails. He drove to the office on Monday at 7:45, parked in the same spot he always used, and rode the elevator to the 14th floor with the particular calm of a man who has already decided something, but has not yet said it out loud. Mensa was already at his desk when Raymond walked in. He did not ask how the party went. He had seen the Chronicles Society page. He gestured toward the chair across from him and opened a folder that was already waiting on the desk like it had been placed there the night before. He started with the numbers. The first consortium disbursement was scheduled for 90 days from the signing date. $1.8 billion wired directly to Kofi Holdings LLC's operating account. After that, the royalty structure kicked in, a 2.3% stake in the corridor's projected extraction revenue, paid quarterly in perpetuity. Mensa said the word perpetuity the way a doctor reads a clean scan result, without drama, because the fact spoke adequately for itself. Raymond sat still and listened. Then Mensa explained what Kezia was entitled to. Under Georgia's separate property statute, assets acquired before a relationship and assets acquired during a relationship using premarital capital or inheritance funds remain the sole property of the individual who assembled them. Every dollar that had gone into Kofi Holdings traced back to two sources: Raymond's pre-relationship savings and the $340,000 his uncle Kofi had left him. The engagement had never been formalized into a marriage. No joint filings had ever been made. No assets had been commingled at the Kofi Holdings level. Kezia Drummond was entitled to nothing from it. Not $1 of the $1.8 billion. Not 1 cent of the quarterly royalties. Not a single document, filing, or right held by Kofi Holdings LLC belonged to her in any legal framework that existed. Raymond nodded once. Mensa then mentioned the venue deposit. $22,000 paid in full by Raymond to an Athens estate for a wedding that would not now take place. The deposit was recoverable, Mensa said. Kezia had signed the booking agreement as a co-party. There was a clear line of legal recovery. Raymond told him to prepare the demand letter. Then Mensa reached across the desk and slid a second folder toward Raymond. This one was thinner. It had a tab on the edge that read Vantage Continental Partners, Peachtree Street Facilitation. Mensa explained it without preamble. 2 years prior, as part of Kofi Holdings' groundwork with the consortium members, Mensa's firm had facilitated a commercial real estate introduction on Vantage's behalf. Vantage had needed a U.S. operations base in Atlanta. A building on Peachtree Street had been identified as suitable. The lease had been signed. The annual rent was $2.3 million. The building's owner of record was a company called Drummond Property Group. Raymond looked at the folder. Wendell Drummond's company had been Vantage's landlord for 2 years. Vantage's rent checks had been keeping Wendell's flagship building financially viable. And that lease had existed because Kofi Holdings had built the consortium relationship that brought Vantage to Atlanta in the first place. Raymond sat with that for a moment. The man who had called his life's work dirt money at every family dinner had been cashing the proceeds of that work for 24 consecutive months without knowing it. Mensa waited. He was good at waiting. It was one of the things Raymond had always valued about him. Raymond looked up from the folder and asked one question. How long would it take to prepare the full asset documentation, the complete legal picture of Kofi Holdings, the separation filing, every document that established the chain of ownership? Mensa said 2 weeks. Raymond said that was fine. What Raymond did not say, what he did not need to say because Mensa had known him for 11 years and could read the particular quality of his silences, was that the document trail Mensa assembled would not just protect Raymond's assets, it would also draw a complete and irrefutable map of everything the Drummond family had failed to notice. Every dismissed phone call, every conversation about dirt money, every polished remark about revisiting wedding timelines, all of it set against the reality of what Raymond had actually been doing while they were busy measuring him. He told Mensa to begin the separation filing and to pull every document in the firm's files that connected Kofi Holdings to the Drummond family's financial life. All of it in order with dates. Mensa wrote a single note on his legal pad, capped his pen, and said he would have a preliminary package ready by Wednesday. Raymond stood, thanked him, and left. He took the stairs down instead of the elevator, which he sometimes did when he needed the extra minutes to think. By the time he reached the lobby, he had not yet decided everything, but he had decided enough. The slow part of this story was over. What came next would move fast. The forensic accountant Mensa retained was a woman named Claudette Burke, and she worked fast. By Wednesday morning, 2 days after Raymond's meeting with Mensa, 4 days after the party, Claudette had pulled the complete transaction history from every joint financial account Raymond and Kezia had shared. She had cross-referenced the withdrawals, the transfer dates, and the destination account numbers. She had traced 14 months of movement, and what she found was not complicated, which was the most damning thing about it. $180,000 moved in careful increments, never a single large transfer that might trigger a flag, always amounts that looked on the surface like routine investment activity. The destination was a jointly held investment account registered to 2 individuals, Kezia Drummond and Preston Avery. Claudette laid the full transaction timeline on Mensa's desk without comment because the numbers commented on themselves. Mensa called Raymond that afternoon. He read the figures aloud without editorial. Raymond listened from his apartment, standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the street below. He said, "Thank you." He asked Mensa to file the dissipation of assets claim alongside the separation documentation. Then he told Mensa the strategy. No public statements, no calls to Kezia, no response to the 2 voicemails Gloria had left, one on Sunday, one on Monday, both of which Raymond had listened to once and not returned. The voicemails had been framed as concern, as reaching out, as family wanting to make sure things were handled properly, which was Gloria's language for wanting to control the outcome before she understood what the outcome was going to be. Raymond had no interest in helping her understand it prematurely. The plan was simple and surgical. Let the legal machinery move first. Let the documents speak before any person did. 3 things were set in motion that week. The separation of assets filing was prepared in full and held, ready to serve at the moment Mensa determined optimal. The venue deposit demand letter, $22,000, addressed directly to Kezia Drummond, citing her co-signature on the booking agreement, was drafted, reviewed, and signed. And Vantage Continental's lease termination, already proceeding on its own legitimate business timeline as the consortium's African corridor activated, and U.S. operations consolidated internationally, was left entirely alone. Raymond did not accelerate it. He did not need to. The clock on Wendell's building was already running without Raymond touching anything. That was the elegance of it. Raymond had not designed any of this as a trap. He had simply built something real, and the Drummond family had built their world against it without knowing, and now the natural movement of one was going to dismantle the other as reliably as water, finding the lowest point of a flaw. He did not feel triumphant about that. He felt clear. On the 3rd day after the party, the consortium's public relations team contacted Mensa's office with an urgent request. The deal was generating significant press interest internationally, and the consortium needed Raymond visible, a statement, an interview, something on the record. The energy sector press was already running pieces on Kofi Holdings based on the public filing documents alone. The story was going to circulate with or without Raymond's participation. Mensa advised one controlled statement only. Raymond agreed to a single press release, prepared through Mensa's office, containing 4 sentences about Kofi Holdings and the corridor agreement. No photographs, no quotes beyond the release. Nothing that could be used as a platform for anything other than the facts. The Atlanta Business Chronicle received the release along with every other outlet on the consortium's distribution list. What the Chronicle did with it was not Raymond's decision. Their business editor, a woman who had been covering Atlanta's financial sector for 19 years, recognized immediately that a Morehouse man from Decatur had just anchored one of the largest energy agreements in the history of the continent, and that his name was not one she had heard at any of the city's industry events. She pulled Raymond's alumni file photo from the 2019 Morehouse homecoming coverage. A clean image, Raymond in a dark blazer, looking directly at the camera with the particular calm of a man who has nothing to prove. And she ran the story at the top of the business section with a headline above the fold. Atlanta-based Kofi Holdings anchors $40 trillion African Energy Consortium. The story posted to the Chronicle's website at 6 in the morning on the third day after Gloria's retirement party. Raymond was already asleep when it did. He had gone to bed at 10, the way he always did on work nights, after eating leftover rice and reading for an hour. His phone was on the charger on the nightstand. By 6:15 it had received 47 notifications. By 7 it had received more than he had received in the prior 3 months combined. He slept through all of it. In Cascade Heights, 12 miles away, Gloria Drummond's phone began ringing at 6:22 and did not stop. Gloria's phone started ringing at 6:22 in the morning and did not stop. By 7, she had 17 missed calls. By 7:30, the number had climbed past 30. The texts came in waves, short messages, forwarded links, a screenshot of the Chronicle's front page appearing in her notifications over and over from different numbers, like the same photograph arriving in the mail from different senders. All of them asking a version of the same question. All of them pointing at the same name. Gloria read the article the first time standing in her kitchen in her robe, coffee going cold on the counter beside her. She read it a second time sitting at the table. She read it a third time with her glasses on, slowly, the way she read documents that required formal comprehension. Then she called Wendell. Wendell was already at his office on Peachtree when his mother called. He had seen the article 40 minutes earlier. One of his property managers had forwarded it with no message attached, just the link, which told Wendell everything about how the news was landing in the professional community around him. He had opened it, read it once, and then done what any real estate developer does when confronted with information that might affect his portfolio. He ran the name, Kofi Holdings LLC, Delaware registration, sole member Raymond Osei. Wendell sat motionless in his chair for a full minute. Then he pulled Vantage Continental Partners' lease file from his filing system. He looked at the facilitation notation on the original brokerage paperwork, a standard line crediting the introduction to a third-party intermediary. He had never looked closely at the intermediary's name before. There had been no reason to. The lease was good, the tenant was paying, and Wendell had better things to do than trace every handshake that led to a signed agreement. The intermediary's name was Kofi Holdings LLC. Wendell closed his laptop. He did not call Gloria back immediately. He sat with what he now knew for 17 minutes before picking up the phone, and when he spoke to his mother, he told her only that the article appeared to be accurate and that they should discuss it as a family. He did not yet tell her about Vantage. He was not ready to say it out loud. Across the city, in her apartment near Ponce de Leon, Kezia saw the article through a text from her friend Dominique at 7:45. The text said only, "Is this your Raymond?" with the link below it. Kezia opened it and read the headline. Her first thought was that it was a different Raymond Osei. Atlanta was a big city. Osei was a Ghanaian name with more than one bearer. The Raymond she knew drove a decade-old car and pressed his own suits and ate reheated rice on Tuesday nights. The Raymond in the Chronicle article was described as the architect of a $40 trillion energy corridor. Those were not the same person. She read further. Morehouse alumnus, Georgia Tech doctorate, mineral rights consultant, Atlanta-based. She put her phone face down on the counter and stood very still. Then she called him. No answer. She called again. No answer. She texted, "Raymond, please call me." Sent it. Watched the delivered notification appear. Watched it stay delivered and not become read. She texted Preston. "Have you seen the Chronicle this morning?" Preston did not respond. She stared at her phone for 10 minutes, waiting for the 3 dots that signal someone is composing a reply. The dots never appeared. That evening, Gloria convened the family at her Cascade Heights house. It was the 3 of them, Gloria, Wendell, and Kezia, seated at the same dining room table where Raymond had eaten pot roast and said please and thank you, and absorbed every dismissal with a patience that none of them had ever thought to question. Gloria had set out water glasses and nothing else, which meant this was a meeting, not a meal. Wendell told them about Vantage. He said it plainly because there was no way to say it that softened it. The building's anchor tenant, the $2.3 million annual lease that serviced the mortgage on his flagship Peachtree Street property, had come to the building through a facilitation agreement brokered by Kofi Holdings LLC, by Raymond. The room went quiet in a way that felt structural, like something load-bearing had been removed. Gloria's first instinct was damage control. She would call Raymond herself. She would frame it as a conversation, a clarification, a family matter being handled with maturity and grace. She had managed difficult stakeholders for 30 years in the Atlanta school system. She knew how to make a problem feel smaller than it was. Raymond did not answer her call. He did not respond to her voicemail. He did not respond to the second voicemail she left the following morning, which was more carefully worded than the first. He did not respond because he had nothing to say yet. Mensa had advised silence, and Raymond was a man who followed good counsel. Kezia tried twice more. Nothing. Preston went dark for 3 full days. No calls, no texts, no social media activity. When Kezia finally reached him on the 4th day, his voice had the particular flatness of a man who had already spoken to a lawyer. Then on the 8th day after the party, Wendell opened his email at his desk and found a formal communication from Vantage Continental Partners Leasing Division. It was 2 paragraphs, professional, precise. It notified Drummond Property Group that Vantage Continental Partners would not be renewing their lease at the conclusion of the current term, citing the consolidation of their North American operations internationally, following the activation of the consortium's African corridor. The vacate date was 90 days from the notice. Wendell read it twice. Then he set his phone face down on his desk, the same way Kezia had done that morning 3 days ago across the city, and he stared at the wall. The vacancy notice was only the first domino, the rest were already falling. Then everything happened at once. Vantage Continental Partners vacated on the last day of the notice period. Precise, professional. No extension requested. Wendell lost 42% of his building's occupied space in a single morning. The math was immediate and brutal. $2.3 million in annual revenue. Gone. The Peachtree Street building's loan-to-value ratio, which had been comfortably serviced by Vantage's rent, collapsed below the covenant threshold on his $9.4 million mortgage. His bank's commercial lending division sent a formal notice within the week. Not a phone call. A letter. Wendell called 2 refinancing lenders. The first reviewed the vacancy rate and declined within 48 hours. The second took 4 days and said the same thing. A building with 42% of its space suddenly empty, anchored by a departing tenant whose exit was publicly connected to a $40 trillion deal that the building owner's own family had publicly humiliated. That was not a borrower any institution wanted to carry. Wendell stopped calling lenders. He started calling lawyers. At the same time, across the city, Mensa's process server arrived at Kezia's apartment on a Tuesday morning with the dissipation of assets claim. Kezia read it standing in her doorway. She closed the door. She called her attorney. Her attorney reviewed the transaction history Mensa had attached, the full 14 months of transfers, the amounts, the dates, the destination account. and called Kezia back that afternoon. The conversation was short. The attorney told her the claim was strong and that contesting it without Preston's cooperation would be exceptionally difficult. Preston was unreachable for 3 days. His phone went to voicemail. His office gave a statement that he was unavailable. When he finally surfaced, it was through a letter from his own attorney confirming that Preston Avery would not be providing testimony or documentation in support of Kezia Drummond's characterization of their joint account arrangement. Preston was not going down with this ship. He had always known how to read a room. The venue deposit demand letter arrived at Kezia's apartment the same week. $22,000. Kezia contested it. She told her attorney it was retaliatory, that Raymond had agreed to the booking, that she bore equal responsibility for the cancelled wedding. Her attorney explained, with the patience of someone explaining a simple thing for the second time, that Raymond's signature was on the original payment and that Kezia's co-signature on the booking agreement created a recovery pathway that was difficult to argue against. Mensa filed the small claims action on a Wednesday. It was public record by Thursday morning. A legal blogger who covered Atlanta family law cases with a particular appetite for irony found the filing Friday afternoon. Her post went up at 2:30. The headline read, "Atlanta woman returned billionaire fiancé's ring. Now she's in court over the wedding deposit." By Saturday, it had circulated through every Atlanta professional and social media network that mattered. By Sunday, it had traveled well beyond Atlanta. Raymond read the headline on his phone in his apartment and set the phone back down on his kitchen table. He did not share it. He did not comment. He went back to his coffee. The cruise was next. Gloria had been planning to board a European river cruise, 14 nights, Rhine and Danube, that her social circle had pooled $14,800 to fund as a retirement gift. It was the kind of gesture that meant something in their community. It meant you were the kind of woman whose friends did that for you. 3 of the contributing families withdrew their shares within the same week, quietly, without public explanation. 2 of them had professional connections to the energy sector. The third had a son who worked in consortium-adjacent finance. None of them wanted the association. The gift organizer sent a group text. The cruise was cancelled. Gloria received the text at her own welcome home brunch, seated at the head of a table with 8 guests around her. She read it. She set her phone face down. She smiled and asked someone to pass the biscuits. But everyone at that table had seen her face in the half-second before she smiled. And in a community where everything is read and remembered, that half-second was enough. The Links chapter invitations became less frequent. One committee assignment quietly went to someone else. A Jack and Jill board meeting was scheduled at a time Gloria had always been available, and no one called to confirm she was still on the list. The silence was not loud. It did not need to be. Social machinery operated on precisely this frequency. The unreturned call, the omitted name, the table that filled up before anyone thought to save her a seat. Raymond observed none of it directly. He heard some of it through Mensa, who tracked relevant developments with professional interest and reported them factually. He heard the rest through the ordinary motion of a city that talked. He did not gloat. He did not call anyone. He went to his office on Auburn Avenue and worked. On a Thursday evening in the 9th week after the party, Kezia drove to Raymond's apartment building on her own. No attorney, no notice, no plan. She sat in the lobby for 2 hours. The front desk called up once. Raymond did not come down. She left without going up. The next morning, Mensa called Raymond to tell him that Kezia had submitted a formal meeting request through her attorney. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Set it up." Mensa's conference room on the 14th floor had a long table, 8 chairs, and a view of Midtown Atlanta that on a clear afternoon made the city look like it was performing for you. Raymond arrived first. He chose the chair with its back to the window. He wanted the light behind him and nothing at his back. Kezia arrived with her attorney 11 minutes later. The attorney, a woman named Tanya Broadnax, whom Mensa knew by professional reputation, opened her portfolio and began with a settlement posture. She spoke about mutual interest in a clean resolution, about both parties having reasonable expectations and the capacity to move forward with dignity. Mensa waited until she finished. Then he opened his own folder and placed the Kofi Holdings asset documentation on the table in a neat stack. He walked through each document with the calm of a man who had done this many times and never once needed to raise his voice. The Georgia Separate Property Framework, the pre-relationship capital sources, the inheritance chain, the Delaware registration, the complete and unbroken ownership record showing that every asset inside Kofi Holdings had been assembled before Kezia Drummond had ever sat across a dinner table from Raymond Osei. Tanya Broadnax reviewed the documents. She made a note. She did not contest the framework. Then Kezia looked across the table at Raymond and asked if she could speak to him directly. Raymond nodded. The attorneys stepped back. Not out of the room. They stayed near the walls, present but withdrawn, the way people stand at a ceremony they are witnessing rather than participating in. Kezia spoke for a long time. She spoke about her family, about the pressure she had grown up under, the weight of her mother's expectations and the architecture of a household where status was the currency, everything else was priced in. She said she had not understood the full picture. She said that if she had known, and here her voice caught, and she steadied it, if she had known what Raymond was building, things would have been different. She said she had made a mistake. She said she was sorry. Raymond let her finish. He did not lean forward. He did not soften his posture. He waited until the last word landed and the room was fully quiet. And then he spoke. He said he wanted her to understand something about the night at the Buckhead Country Club. Not the tablecloth, not the applause, not the notes she had brought with her to the microphone. He wanted her to understand the specific timing. He told her that 72 hours before she slid that ring across the table, he had sat in a downtown Atlanta conference room and signed a document that made Kofi Holdings the indispensable gatekeeper of a $40 trillion energy corridor, that the first disbursement to his account was scheduled for 90 days from that signing, that every asset inside that company had been assembled before she had ever called him by his name. He told her about Vantage Continental Partners, about the Peachtree Street building, about the $2.3 million a year that had been flowing into her brother's mortgage payments, sourced from a tenant that existed in Atlanta because Raymond had helped put it there. He told her that Wendell had cashed those checks every month for 2 years while calling Raymond's work dirt money at the family table. He told her that her mother's retirement had been celebrated in a room full of people whose professional and social esteem for Gloria Drummond was already shifting, because the world they all operated in had seen the Chronicle headline and recalculated the meaning of what the Drummond family had done to the man in that headline. He told her all of it plainly, without anger, without performance. And then he said the words he had been carrying since the night he walked out of that ballroom. You slid that ring across the table in front of your mother's whole world, Kezia. You told 200 people you were finally free. I want you to understand what you were actually doing in that moment. 72 hours before you did that, I had signed my name to something that was quietly holding your brother's building together, keeping your mother's reputation in place and funding the future you told that room you deserved. You didn't leave a man who was beneath you. You left the foundation your entire family was standing on. and none of you even knew my name was on it." The room held that for a moment. Kezia's face broke in stages, first the jaw, then the eyes, then the full weight of it moved through her, and she lowered her head, and her shoulders came forward, and she cried the way people cry when they understand something that cannot be undone. Raymond watched her. He did not move toward her. He did not look away. When it became clear that she was not going to speak again, Raymond turned to Tanya Broadnax and told her clearly that there would be no reconciliation, that the Kofi Holdings assets were not subject to negotiation, and that the small claims action regarding the venue deposit would proceed to its conclusion. He stood. He thanked Tanya Broadnax by name for her time. He nodded once to Mensa, then he walked out. Mensa caught up with him at the elevator. The doors had not yet opened. Raymond was looking at his phone. He had one unread text from a number he recognized, the woman in the Ankara wrap. He opened it. It said, "Kofi would have been proud." Raymond read it once. He put the phone in his pocket. The elevator arrived. He stepped inside and the doors closed behind him, and for the first time in 10 weeks the weight of the whole story seemed to settle somewhere outside of him, into the past where it belonged. The legal proceedings closed the way Raymond had always expected they would, not with drama, but with paperwork. The court applied George's separate property framework exactly as Mensa had described it in that Monday morning meeting 10 weeks prior. Kezia was awarded standard dissolution terms for a broken engagement, her personal property, her own financial accounts, and nothing from Kofi Holdings. Not a dollar, not a filing, not a single right in the corridor. The dissipation of assets claim against her joint account with Preston settled outside of court for an amount Mensa described as meaningful. The $22,000 venue deposit was returned to Raymond in full, court-ordered within 30 days of the small claims judgment. Kezia did not contest the final terms. Her attorney submitted the paperwork, and it was done. Preston Avery relocated to Charlotte within 6 weeks of the settlement. He updated his professional listings quietly and did not make an announcement. Kezia did not follow him. Whatever arrangement had existed between them dissolved the way most arrangements built on bad math eventually do, without ceremony, without explanation, and with each party understanding that the other was now a liability. Wendell's Peachtree Street building went to distressed sale in the 4th month after Vantage vacated. 2 institutional buyers made offers. The winning bid was below market value, purchased by a real estate fund that specialized in distressed commercial assets. After the mortgage was satisfied and the transaction costs absorbed, Wendell walked away from his flagship property with $340,000, the same amount Raymond had inherited from his uncle, the same money that had seeded Kofi Holdings, the same dirt that had built everything. Gloria stepped back from the Links Chapter Social Committee. Not loudly, that Gloria Drummond was not a woman who did anything loudly. She cited the demands of her transition into retirement, the need for rest, the wisdom of creating space for new leadership. The women on the committee accepted her explanation with the particular grace of people who already knew the real one. The retirement she had designed as a permanent monument to her social standing became, instead, a quiet withdrawal. The phone calls thinned, the invitations adjusted. The machinery she had spent a career operating found other operators. Raymond heard about most of this gradually, the way news moves through a city, not through any direct source, just through the ordinary circulation of a community that talked. He did not seek the information out. He did not find satisfaction in it the way he might have expected to. It simply was what it was, consequence, moving at its own pace through a world that had always been more interconnected than any of them had bothered to notice. He moved into a modest house in Inman Park in the 5th month. 3 bedrooms, a porch with good light in the morning. He drove the same car. He kept the same office on Auburn Avenue. The consortium's first disbursement cleared in the 91st day after signing exactly as Mensa had said it would, and Raymond instructed Mensa to allocate a portion of the first proceeds to establish the Kofi OC Foundation. The foundation's purpose was simple: geology scholarships at Morehouse, engineering program partnerships with 3 HBCU institutions in Ghana. The first cohort of recipients numbered 14 students, selected by a committee that Raymond was not on because he believed the work should outlast his involvement in any specific decision. He attended the announcement quietly, in the back of a room, the way he had always attended things. It was at the Foundation's first donor dinner in Accra, held at a conference center near the University Quarter, with West African music moving softly under the conversation of people who had flown from 5 countries to be there, that Raymond met Adaeze Nwosu. She was a structural engineer. She served on the board of a West African infrastructure non-profit. She found him near the back of the room, which was where he always was, and she asked him what the foundation meant to him. Not as a courtesy question, as a real one. She waited for the real answer with the patience of someone who had learned that real answers were worth waiting for. Raymond told her about his uncle, about the envelope and the survey documents, about the gift of deep looking that his uncle had named and he had spent his career practicing. He said the foundation meant that the next Raymond Osau, whoever that was, wherever they were growing up right now, whatever table they were being dismissed at, would have a path that didn't require silence and inheritance and 4 years of invisible work before anyone saw them. Adaeze listened to all of it. Then she said, "That is the right reason." Raymond thought about that on the flight back to Atlanta. It was the kind of sentence that settled into a person and stayed. 6 months after a woman had slid a ring across a white linen tablecloth and told 200 people that Raymond Osei was not enough, Raymond sat in a house in Inman Park in a chair that had been shipped from Accra after his uncle's estate closed. It was a wide, solid chair, the kind that has absorbed decades of the weight of a man who thought carefully before speaking. Raymond had placed it near the window where the morning light came through clean and direct. His phone rang. The consortium's board. He let it ring twice. Then he picked up. Here is what this story is ultimately about. It is not about revenge, though justice arrived with precision. It is not about money, though the money was real and the numbers were staggering. It is about what happens when a world that has decided it already knows who you are comes into contact with the truth of what you have built. Raymond Osei did not change. He did not grow. He did not transform from one kind of man into another. He was always exactly who he was. The only thing that changed was that the room finally had to reckon with it. A man's worth was never in his title, his car, or his seat at the table. It was in what he built quietly, in the dark, while no one was paying attention. Now, what would you have done in Raymond's position? Would you have walked out of that ballroom and stayed silent? Would you have let the legal machinery do the work, the way Raymond did? Or would you have handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you stand on this one. If this story moved you the way it moved me to tell it, please hit that like button. It helps this channel more than you know, and it tells me to keep bringing you stories exactly like this one. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time, because we have more coming. And every single one of them is worth staying for. I will see you in the next one.